dev channel, so we'll just it's the regular channel. Go to this one. Ready? Is it the wrong? It's not a duplicate stream key. This is confused, but it's not confused. So okay, yep, everything works there. Okay, yep, we're popped out here, so that's fine. Twitch, okay, we're good. All right. All right. Now with all the silliness fixed, we're gonna jump right in here. Let's go with paint first, so I can illustrate what we're doing. So in the, as far as services go, we have the Twitch API. We have Twitch OAuth. And we have the Twitch WebSocket servers. These are actually two different things, but they both talk OAuth, which I probably should have that way, because I need to use this too. So here, all right, I have a StreamerBot and SpeakerBot. These two talk to each other directly. I have StreamerBot, which talks to the Twitch API, and from what I can gather, also uses the WebSocket server, because it would have to for some of the event subscribes, right? Like throwing bits and things like that, which StreamerBot absolutely handles. What I was doing is using StreamerBot when those events fired to write to a text file. Okay, which just contained key value pairs for all of my goal progress, right? So the 4 progress bars here that still don't work, hopefully we'll have those work tonight, hopefully. And then in OBS, I would use a browser source plugin to speak to a node server, which also read this document. So this was writing well, this actually would read, write. This would just read. And it would generate an HTML page that the browser source could then display. And I'll actually do this 4 times, 1 for each of the 4 progress bars. And then OBS will display that. Okay. This, however, creates a situation where this file can be trying to be used by both of these programs at the same time, which doesn't work. Okay. Specifically when one of them is writing. Okay. When you write a file, you lock it. It's how operating systems work. And if you're writing good code, you're going to lock your file before you start writing it, just in case something else is already writing it, or to prevent anything else from opening it, writing it while you're doing so. That lock is an exclusive lock, which means nothing can touch the file. So when the node server would go to read that file, which it did about every 5 seconds or so, okay, it would reread the file, and then it would update everything. Unfortunately, if this file was locked when it tried to read it, it would crash. Because I had an unhandled exception in there about what would happen when you open the file. Now, I could fix that unhandled exception, right, with a try-catch block. Not really a big deal, okay? But it became really apparent to me that that's the wrong way to do it. Like, this is unnecessarily complicated, but it wasn't. At the time when I developed this ridiculous strategy, right, it was not possible to create new Twitch API integrations. They weren't approving any more applications. Recently, Twitch came off of that. So now they have, if we go to dev.twitch.tv, right, you can go to your console, and after you log in, and you can create applications. Yes, that is my real IP address. Okay. Not that this matters actually, because this is what I ended up using. By the way, for those of you watching this video going, oh my god, he put his IP address, it's not dangerous to share your IP address with people, okay? Not if your network is even remotely secure, and mine is. More importantly, I've run Minecraft servers for the community, so a large portion of the community has already used this IP address to connect to that Minecraft server. It's not like it's private information, right? And you're like, oh, well, why don't you use a domain? That'll hide your IP address. Domains don't hide your IP address. Don't be dumb. You're showing your ignorance. Okay? Literally, you could type, I don't like using PowerShell. We're going to use a command prompt. So you type mslookup google.com. Hey, look, there's Google's IP address. Right there. mslookup yahoo.com. That's all of Yahoo's IP addresses. mslookup twitch.tv. There you go. Okay. Domains do not hide your IP address. So it's literally yeah, by the way, nslookup isn't the only command. I believe you can use host as well. Or is that a Windows, or is that a Linux thing? I can't remember. Yeah, host is not recognized here. It's a Linux thing.
We've got ads.
Oh, we got ads. We'll wait. Thank you. I muted for commercials and then forgot to unmute it. All right. We actually just came back from ads though, so it's no big deal. So I deleted the entire tool chain there because it just wasn't working well. What I'm doing now is I'm creating a secondary application, again, also with Node, which this is a little more complicated. This is going to create an HTTP server, an HTTPS server. It's going to the HTTP server is for OBS to be able to interact with it, again, same way it always did, through the browser source plugin. The HTTPS server is actually for Coffee. Coffee has one callback that must fly to an HTTPS server. So that's going to be in there. This is going to directly access the Twitch API and WebSockets. And it's going to hook that information itself that I was previously using StreamerBot for. And then I can use that information to hold an in-memory map of all the progress bar data. And then I can use that progress bar data to continually generate new pages for the HTTP server for OBS to be able to continue rendering my progress bars correctly, which it still currently doesn't. There's a lot more to this because we also need OAuth. So we're going to have to authenticate with OAuth here in order to be able to access these resources. And then this is going to come around this way. But also, when you use OAuth, it has to be able to send a token back to you. And it does that via callback here. It's the only way OAuth works. This is wild. I mean, it's not the only way, it's the most secure way that OAuth works, and I like to be secure. Now, I had a basic prototype of this working this morning, but I don't like the way it's written. And it was very verbose about what it output, and that's not particularly safe. So we're going to try to organize some code a little bit better. Where's my... Here. That's not what I want. This is what I want. That's not what I want. I'm missing stuff. Pull this over here. Oh, and then I also need this. Okay. This tool here, we'll go over this real quick, is a utility that I wrote in JavaScript for Node to be able to open configuration files that are written in JSON. So I can create a JSON file that looks something like this. That's some really complex data types, right? And I can endlessly and infinitely add more and more complex data structures to this, with more arrays, more objects, more just key value strings or numbers if I want, right? Which that's a 2. That should be that way. You can quote it, but it treats it as a string when you do. And this function will pull this object out of the config file and turn it into a real JavaScript object, not just a long string of characters, so that you can directly use it. And I did this using the promises pragma, which guarantees that the function will return something, which is important because it's an async function. And async obviously means that it's asynchronous, so it has to, you have to wait for this to return something because you've guaranteed that it will return something. Also, I made a minor mistake when I was doing this earlier. You must return something. It literally is part of the pragma. And by something, I mean you have to call either reject or resolve exactly once before this code exits. You must. You can actually call it more than once, but it will never fire more than once. It's kind of how promises work, which is really cool. But you must call either resolve or reject at least once, or the promise will hang and await will never return. Which you don't actually see await here, but I could say something like, let's import this first. So we'll say const utils equals require /lib kws utils.js. Okay. And that imports the package here. And the way I did this, because this is a static class or a static function and there's no constructor here, I don't have to call new. I could just use it natively. So I could say get API config, right? And I can say const config equals. Actually, we'll name it a little more appropriately. API config equals utils get. What do I call that thing? It's get JSON from file. And then I just supply the path name, which is /conf api.conf. Actually, that's got some sensitive data in it, so for demonstrative purposes, I'm not going to use that. Just a second here. Switch which config file I'm. All right, we're gonna use the httpd.conf, which is in the same directory there. Now I can say use await, because we said await, this is now an async function. And we'll just say console log API config. Yeah, this is wrapped in a function, so we have to call it. So we'll just say get API config. And now when I run it, it's a JavaScript object. So, and to prove that, we can say, I don't want to dump the whole thing. I want just the HTTP configuration and just the address. Okay. Now, this is a little silly. We don't really do it this way, but there's the value. Or I can say port. And there's the port, 143,000. Okay. So we're going to delete that, and we're going to change this back to API config. Okay. Now, what I'm about to do next is technically considered a bad practice. It's not good for production code. However, this is not production code. I'm going to write basically a global variable. I'm going to do that with var global equals, and we're going to say API conf. And we're going to say HTTPD conf, also undefined. All right. And now here we're going to set, because this returns a promise, we say then we're going to say global API conf equals API config. No. Hang tight. There's a, how did I fucking do this before? Just want to make sure I get this right. Not the way I'm doing it now. Not at all. I did something entirely different. That's funny. I used a return value instead, which is not how I want to do this. At this point, API config should actually have a value, so that might work, but it might not. And then also catch it's not resolve is for the actual promise itself, not just look at where I did use a promise properly before. Okay, it's not resolve, it's response. It doesn't really matter what you call this, I don't think. Maybe it does. I think I just found a bug in my previous code. That's very funny. Yeah, we're not going to call this response because that feels convoluted. We're going to call it resolve. And we'll set the global variable to the data we were looking for. Catch error. And what we'll say here is console error. Unable to read config file. I always do this. You put a backtick here, and then just say error. It's actually not the right way to do it either. There, single quote, and because console error can actually take a list of arguments. And then we're going to say process exit code equals 255. Process exit. Okay, which means if there's an error doing this, it will just die, which is good. We don't want this thing to try to run without a configuration. And it failed because it doesn't like that. Oh, because this is a string literal that you only quote the string literal that way when you have backticks around it. Different error, cannot access API before initialization. What? That's a new error. I've never seen that before. Cannot access API. But it's... That's funny. All right. Check this out, chat. Okay, so what's happening is because async functions do not fire the same way regular functions do, it's actually trying to call. It's firing the async first, right? So then it's trying to get all of this information, right? It's doing this, the await, and because it's waiting for it, processing doesn't really stop, right? It tries to do this, which is where it assigns the promise to this, and this hasn't even initialized yet. So a little bit ridiculous. Well, this should fix it. No. Cannot access the API before initialization. Fetch stream hook to async get API config. It really doesn't like me doing that. That's neat. Maybe it's because I need a main. So what I did before was I actually Node programs don't have a real entry point, right? This is its entry point. But in higher level or lower level programming languages, you have a function that is an entry point. That function is typically called main. It doesn't have to be, and you can actually change it. It doesn't have to be called that. But by convention, no one ever does. You know, if you're writing a C# application, your entry point is static void main. if you're writing a C application, your entry point is static int main, because C applications have to return something when they exit, and that something is usually a status code. So what you can do is you create a function main, and you just call set up globals and you would say get API config, right? And then instead of this, you just call main. Does that work? No. It really doesn't like that. Where's he complaining about that? At line 6, right here. Why? That's so weird. Alright, let's try something a little bit different. Instead of this, we're going to say global API config equals wait config, okay? Or get API config, not setup config. And we are going to change this, right? Like this is none of this is permanent. All right. And then when we have this, instead of setting it this way, we're just going to return it. It really doesn't like that. What? Setup. Oh, setup globals is not defined. Oh, it's not. Okay. Cannot access API config before initialization. I don't understand how that's happening. Unable to read config file. Cannot access API config before initialization at 17 break. So now line 17 right here. But it is this is an initialization right here, by the way. So I don't know what's happening there. I didn't have these kinds of problems before. All right. Maybe this isn't finishing the initialization. We're just going to skip that. What if I come down to here and I say return API config? Not as correct as I would think, but it works. Now I'm going to go into I need to be able to test that that works without leaking information. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say console log API config. Nope. Global API config, and then one of the values from it that isn't important. Response type will be fine. Since we know that this is a Java, a JSON object that's going to be returned, I can treat it like one. And now if I go here, it printed nothing, which tells me that this is returning the promise and not.
We've got ads.
Not a value yet. All right, we get ads. Okay. When the problem says resolve, where do I get that data though? What is in resolve? Let's find out. All right, I'm going to actually move this because I'm not sure what this is going to do. So we're going to throw an arrow. That's what it's going to do. Response type. We're going to do away with that actually. Okay, so that's neat. It did actually get the config file. And I'm glad I did this off screen because it actually dumped the entire contents of the file. So is resolve the variable then that inherits the information? Because I could just return that. Just return that, right? And then instead of returning here, we'll just dump out of the bottom of this. No. Doesn't like that. Cannot read properties of undefined reading response type. Okay, so it came back. That's so weird. Global API. Let me just do this real quick, just to see. Yeah, it's coming back. It's undefined, which is a thing that happens with this, right? Like return values get really messed up here. So if I said global API config equals resolve, and I just fire this, okay? Yeah, it's still undefined. This doesn't have a value, but it should. This is a variable. This is a lambda. I thought that was the case. Still not firing correctly though. And it's because this, we're going into main. Setting up globals, then getting the API config. Wondering why I fired twice. It's so weird. Oh, okay. You're using set time to simulate asynchronous code. So if you look at this, this is all follows that exact pragma of we create a promise and then we try to do something immediately, which that something was actually test to see if the file that we're looking for is even there. And then if it's not, it immediately calls the promise reject. If it is there, it attempts to read the file, and if there's an error reading the file, then it again immediately rejects it. and then else it will feed the JSON data into a variable using Node's built-in JSON parse, or JavaScript's built-in JSON parse, and then it resolves with that JSON data. So instead of resolve, why don't we go with JData, because that's the argument that's actually being passed back from resolve. And I don't know if that's creating a problem, but probably not. I'm sure this is just a lack of my experience using async functions. Yes, it is my lack of experience. Okay, so let's do that too. Okay, good. At least I'm getting an object there. Oh, you can't use a weight here. Wish I want to use that set timeout. It's actually a lambda. And then what? We're gonna make it 2 seconds. Just to allow for some time to pass to see if that promise fulfills. It does. Okay. So we think global. All right, so if I bring this back over here and I run the code again, see, it just prints code, which is exactly what it should print, okay? This is the expected response. And what's happening is this is because writing or reading a file is a little bit longer of a process, right? It takes a second. That's happening, and then it's happening like, and the program's not waiting for it to finish. It's just moving through, because that's what async functions are for. So that your code doesn't just stop on a really big, really heavy execution. So what I had to do was set a timeout of 2 seconds. That way I can be sure that the file is read, parsed, pumped into a JSON object, and properly returned before I tried to print its value. So, which means you should have a event handler or something, or an event called when this finishes, in order to know when you can continue executing code, or simply don't use a async function. I don't know if you can do this, but I'm going to try. Again, move this over here. Yeah, it printed nothing again, and that's because this function is still async, and the async keyword at the end of the function means it's not going to fire on the main thread. So, yeah, the program just dumps out before it's filled, or before this ever has a chance to have data in it. Which again, you could do this with, if I just remove the async from the front of this, right? I can make this a synchronous call, but that sucks. And it kind of defeats the point of all of this. Now, it's not a huge deal, right? Because I don't think. Oh, I don't think, can you use promises in a? You wouldn't normally use promises in an async or an asynchronous call, though. It kind of defeats the purpose of the promise. The promise is designed so that you can guarantee that at some point your call will return something, even if that something is an error. But you'll have a way to check that, a regular controlled way to check that, which is what I do here. So if I misspell this on purpose, right? File not found or is not readable, which is, I moved the wrong box. Exactly what I told it to do. Unable to read config file and then print the error. Unable to read config file and then it printed the error. So the catch handler works. The problem is this. And knowing where the data is. So if I say console log JData, this is probably just going to print the promise object and not the data I'm looking for. Oh, you still gotta fix the spelling of the file, Joe. It actually printed the whole fucking object. Are you serious? Why does that work? Why does that work, but assignment does not work? Delete this. I just gonna do it that way since I'm doing it off screen. Okay, why can I not call that? Wait is only valid in async functions. Yeah, I know. This is an async function. And top level bodies of modules, right? Wait, get API config. Yeah, it's bitching about this. Oh, because this is not an async function. I missed that. Okay, now it's asynchronous. And it printed an empty. It printed this. That's what it dumped. But again, if I set timeout, Okay, neat. It actually came back undefined. But something came back, though. That's weird. This came up, like, this key value pair is present, but it's like this didn't return anything. I don't believe that works. It does. But again, initially this doesn't have a value. So if I remove the await here and the async here, what do we get? I get a promise, and then I get the value. So sticking a timeout in the middle of your code to make sure all of your variables have been filled and all of your promises have been resolved or thrown feels like dog shit. That doesn't seem right.